The billboard was an advertisement for Marlboro, the cigarette company. Now, you may be surprised to hear this because in most of the Western world, cigarette companies cannot advertise. They don't have any billboards. They hardly even have sponsorships of rally car racing and Formula One and so on and so forth. They've been banned from advertising and promoting their product. And the bans and the restrictions that they face are increasing in making their lives ever more difficult. In the East, it's a very different story, though. In fact, I remember a few years ago, one of the Southeast Asian countries, I can't remember which one it was, I think it was Thailand or Taiwan or one of those countries, that actually enacted a law through their parliament to ban cigarette advertising in public. And it was, in fact, Western governments which came to the rescue of these huge cigarette companies, saying that, no, you can't do that. Let them advertise their products and let them promote what they have to promote. So this giant billboard didn't come so much as a surprise to me as much as the message that it carried. The message is a very powerful one if you think about it. The guy is saying, I'm a surfer. I enjoy surfing. This is my life. This is what I do. And so I don't care what the weatherman says. I don't care what the government say. I don't care what the health professionals say. I don't care if they tell me that it's dangerous for my health. I do it because it's an adventure, because I enjoy it, because it's what makes me a man. And this is interesting because I looked up some statistics about the cigarette industry, about the tobacco industry. And as it turns out, they spend a whopping $20 billion a year in marketing. That's their marketing budget. $20 billion. If you think about it, cigarettes should have been extinct a long time ago. People shouldn't be smoking anymore. What with all the negative advertising that's happening? I mean, I don't know about America, but I do know in many other countries, they're now forced to put gruesome pictures of cancers and ulcers and all sorts of medical conditions on the pack. So it's really such a disgusting thing just to carry around a cigarette pack. It really is disgusting. And yet somehow they've managed to market their product so effectively, so well, on a global scale, that it's still very cool to smoke in many circles. How did they manage to do that? And I think there is a lesson to be learned from the tobacco industry when it comes to marketing, if I may use that term, for lack of a better word, marketing our religion. How is it that they somehow manage to market their dangerous, disgusting, and I mean no offense to those of you who happen to be smokers, but it's a dangerous habit. It's disgusting. It smells bad. It's just horrible. And yet, they've been able to market it so effectively. There's a huge lesson for us, yes, even us as Muslims, trying to portray a more positive image of our faith, of our religion, of our culture around the world. We could learn from the tobacco industry. Because if they can market such a dangerous, gruesome, disgusting product so effectively, make people pay for it, and pay hefty amounts. I know, for example, in Australia, just a few weeks back, the government imposed yet another additional tax on top of all the other taxes that were already imposed on tobacco products, making the product so expensive, I really don't know how people can still afford it. It's almost getting as expensive as drugs. People would probably have to be forced into, stealing in order to afford to pay for this terrible habit of theirs, which, by the way, most of our scholars consider to be prohibited anyway. I actually did some research on this a while back, a couple of weeks ago, And as it turns out, most of our scholars, if not all of them, I didn't go through every single one. I went through the most popular of our jurists and our maraja, and they all either ban it and prohibit it categorically or conditionally. And the condition is always, if it causes irreparable harm and damage to your health, then it is non-permissible. And if they're asked a follow-up question about how to determine whether it causes irreparable harm, they always refer us back to the experts. And they say you have to ask the medical professionals. And I don't think anyone would dispute the fact that the medical profession would consider the consumption of tobacco products to be harmful to our health. And so there's a lesson there for all of us, brothers and sisters. Now, a lot of people might say, cigarettes are different. Cigarettes are addictive. You need them once you get hooked. You can't let go. That's why they're successful. And I beg to differ. Because generation after generation after generation, you've got a new generation of smokers being created over and over again. And the people who start out smoking, they're not addicted to it. Why do they smoke? They smoke because of the immense amount of effort and knowledge and energy and money that's being pumped into the PR aspect of cigarette smoking. Because somehow they're able to package it in such a way so as to make it appealing to everyone, young and old, men and women, Eastern, Western. It's the universal language. They say music is the universal language. No, I think smoking is the universal language. Everybody does it. It's been banned from public places in most countries. It's been banned on planes. It's been banned in different venues. The amount of effort that's being put into to counter smoking is just immense. And again, yet somehow, spending $20 billion, these people have been able to make it prevail. How? Again, if you say that it's addictive and therefore you can't let go, and therefore you're compelled to smoke, and therefore you have to do it, as I said, I disagree with that. But there's another point to make, and that is that religion is a lot more powerful than any, and it's probably not the best way to describe it, but it's a lot more powerful than the most addictive drug. Why? Because there's a natural disposition in all of us to be religious. Because we're endowed with the faculty of the fitrah. Because as human beings, we all long and yearn for something higher, for something bigger than all of us, for our Creator, for someone who's in control when we're not, for someone who can change our destiny when we cannot. Even the head of the Iraqi Communist Party, my father mentions that a few years ago, they happened to be at a conference, and my father was sitting next to the chairman of the Iraqi Communist Party when he was called to the podium. And as he got up to go to give his address, it was an Iraqi opposition conference in Beirut. As he got up to go to the podium, he tripped over and was about to fall. And as he was about to fall, he said, Ya Allah! The head of the Iraqi Communist Party, whose doctrine is based on the assumption that God does not exist, that religion is a drug, is suddenly calling out to God, not when he's on a plane and the pilot says we're all about to die, but when he's about to trip over as he's walking to the podium. Even there, he begs God for help to intervene. So there is a natural disposition, brothers and sisters, in all of us to yearn for something bigger and greater, to God. So the disposition is there. You really don't need to do any marketing. You really don't need much PR. All you have to do is put it out there. As we mentioned yesterday, the beautiful narration by Imam Ali ibn Musa Rida alayhi salatu wasalam, who says, لَوْ عَرِفَ النَّاسِ Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. just to get warmed up. I know it's still a little early for most people. We need a much more powerful salawat, inshallah. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Allah. He says, if only people could see the exquisite nature, the beautiful nature of our words, they'd follow us. We really don't have to go out there and do what the Wahhabis are doing. And I've seen them, I'm sure you've seen them yourself, on campuses and in different places, wearing that weird looking dashtasha that is so short it looks like a miniskirt kind of thing, boasting sort of that long beard, which for some reason they believe that the beard has to be so long and so bushy that you should be able to see it when looking at the person from behind. That's the actual criteria. The beard has to be so bushy that you could see it when looking from behind, right? Having that sort of appearance, they are on campuses, they're on the streets, they're giving out pamphlets, they've got these Muslim Day programs, they spend money, they work really hard, and to their credit, they really work hard. They're brave. They don't care what the weatherman says. They don't care if anybody tells them that they're a bunch of weirdos. They don't care if they've got people, insulting them. They're out there to do what they're supposed to do. Subhanallah, Amir al-Mu'mineen, the commander of the faithful, says to his companions on one occasion, and I swear it's statements like these that make my blood boil. It reminds me of the oppression suffered by the commander of the faithful. He was oppressed so much that he once even said, "Batat al-umamu takhsha." Nations have endured the fear of persecution coming from their governments. Nations are always afraid of their governments. Even in the most democratic countries, there's always a sense of fear. When you see a cop, right, you suddenly start to drive a little slower, not because you respect the cop or you love him or you want to abide, you suddenly want to become a law-abiding citizen, but because you're afraid of what the cop could be, is capable of doing to you, capable of, arresting you or what have you. Amir al-Mu'mineen says, nations have consistently been afraid of the persecution of their governments, and yet I am afraid of being persecuted by my own people. And he says to his companions, he says, you know what your problem is? Your problem isn't the fact that it's not that you're on the wrong side. It's not that you adhere to an erroneous philosophy. It's because they hold on to their falsehood more stronger than you hold on to your truth. And that's been the case for 14 centuries, brothers and sisters. And that is what needs to change. So, how does the media get it so wrong? And we know how horribly wrong the media gets it. When it comes to Islam in general, when it comes to the Ahlul Bayt school of thought in particular. Now, why do I say in particular the Ahlul Bayt school of thought? Because media outlets across the board, across the world, are engaging in a fierce campaign of misinformation about the Ahlul Bayt school of thought. Muslim and non-Muslim. When it comes to Islam, it's the non-Muslim media that gets it wrong. When it comes to us, the followers of the Ahlul Bayt, it's the Muslim media as well as the non-Muslim media that gets it so terribly wrong that begs the question of what can we do to fix that? And you know what? It's about time we fix it. I mean, there was a time when the only way you could learn about Islam was to go to the library, go to the section on religion. You'd find about 3 books. You'd pick those up, maybe an entry in Encyclopedia Britannica, where you had information. And I remember up until as recently as 5 years ago, or 6 years ago, back in 2003, when I looked up the entry on Fatima in Encyclopedia Britannica, which was almost written by someone who loathed Fatima az-Zahra, someone who absolutely hated Fatima az-Zahra. It had statements like, she had a somewhat rocky relationship with her husband, oftentimes going back to her father, seeking his help and arbitration to solve the problems she was having with her. Where do you get that from? You won't even find stuff like that in Sunni sources, in Wahhabi sources. Where do you get it from? So, there was a time when it was difficult to access information about Islam, because you had those Orientalists who didn't always harbor the best intentions towards Islam, or sometimes were simply not educated enough, or simply had access to the wrong sources of information. They would go to Egypt to learn about the Shia faith, for example, which, sure, there are many Shia in Egypt, there are many shrines for the followers of the Ahlul Bayt, but if you want to know about Catholicism, you go to the Vatican. You don't go to Tallahassee. You go to the source. And I remember just a few weeks ago, we had an interfaith session with a Christian group at an Anglican church. I don't know if you have Anglican churches here in America. You probably don't have many of those. You do? But this was a really interesting interfaith program that ran every 2 weeks, and it really was wonderful. And we'd sit down. The program was scheduled to run for about an hour and a half, 2 hours, and yet we'd go on for up to 3.5, 4 hours on end, discussing all sorts of matters of contention. There was nothing that was off the table. We discussed everything in a very open and transparent fashion. It really was beautiful, and I think the more interfaith programs we have, the better it is. And I'll talk a little bit about that later on, because I think this is just one tool available to us in the plethora of apparatus that we could utilize in order to change the perception of Islam in the West, and particularly in America. And so, again, I think the question is, if there was a time when there was little access to information about Islam, that is certainly no longer the case. You can now access information about the faith a lot easier, a lot faster. I wouldn't say that the quality of the information has increased in an equal way. The quality of the information is still a matter of debate, and that's something that we need to address, and I'll talk about it a little later. But generally speaking, it's a lot easier to access information. And, the misconceptions, by the way, range from the most bizarre, the most absurd, to the subtle kind of misconceptions that also need to be addressed. The subtle misconceptions include things like the oppression of women. And I think that one of the biggest problems that we have is the fact that, for example, in Europe, there's now a huge controversy about the banning of the niqab, or the Muslim face veil, which, according to some scholars, is obligatory. Some others use verses in the Quran and traditions of the Ahlul Bayt to argue that it's not obligatory. But no one says that it's forbidden except while you're performing the pilgrimage to Hajj. When you are in the state of Ihram, a woman must not cover her face, which is one of the arguments that some scholars use to say that it's not obligatory to cover the face, because had that been the case, then why would a woman be required to take off the face veil when she's in the state of Ihram? But, the controversy is out there, and there's now even talk of banning the hijab. France was one of the first countries to do that in their schools, though of course it was preceded by Turkey, ironically. And this is the argument used by the French oftentimes. They say, well, we're not the first country to do that. A so-called Islamic country started it. But the controversy is there, and it really hurts me when I hear people say that it must be banned because it is a sign of the oppression of women. But it's the women that want to wear hijab. It's the women themselves. I swear, if I wanted to compel my wife to take off her face veil, not the hijab, She wears a face veil. If I wanted to force her to take it off, she would say, I would rather get a divorce than be forced to take it off. She wants to wear it. There's nothing I can do about it. I cannot influence her in any other way. Women themselves want to wear this. I mean, what happened to the old? It's such hypocrisy that on the one hand you're talking about, liberties and freedoms and the ability for a person to express themselves freely and to choose their own lifestyles and their own dress code and whatnot, while on the other hand you impose a certain dress code for women and say that you can wear this and you can't wear that. It's such hypocrisy when bike helmets are allowed, even though they cover the face and just leave the eyes out. And yet face veils are being banned in many countries. But the worst argument is that it is a sign of the oppression of women. What if women themselves want to wear it? Which is always the case. In 99.999% of cases, it's the women themselves. So these are the subtle misconceptions which need to be addressed. But you have bigger misconceptions. The whole question about Islam being a religion of violence, being a religion of terror, which I'm sure you've heard many people talk about this. You yourselves have developed your own opinions and views and arguments to counter this idea, this false notion that became prevalent, especially after 9/11. And so I don't want to talk about that. But what I do want to talk about is the fact that if you probably won't believe this, I have heard speakers in Saudi Arabia, members of the Wahhabi religious establishment, I've heard them with my 2 ears when they were talking about the Shia faith and the followers of Ahlul Bayt, and they would say things like, Shias are reported to have tails. I've heard this myself. I'm not quoting anybody. I've heard it. And we're talking about high-ranking clerics in the religious establishment who actually believe that Shias have tails. In other words, what they're trying to say, the message is that they're not exactly human beings, right? They're not what we think they are. There's some kind of alien species that have infiltrated the earth in order to corrupt the Muslims and their religion, or something along those lines. I mean, I really don't know what goes on. What's the logical process that goes on in their head that would make them believe such a concocted lie? I've heard them say that the definition of a Sayyid, and I apologize, I'm just quoting what they say about us, and I think it's important we know how they think, that a Sayyid, we all know what a Sayyid is. A Sayyid is anyone who's a descendant of the Holy Prophet of Islam, or a descendant of a member of Banu Hashim. So you could be a Sayyid if you're a descendant of Abbas, the Prophet's uncle. And I know Sayyids who are descendants of Abbas. We sometimes joke about how his ancestors actually massacred mine, and we then talk about some form of compensation payments or whatever. So that's a Sayyid. It's plain, it's simple. There is not much special about being a Sayyid. There are juristic issues that have to be dealt with. There's obviously the general sense of respect that a lot of people show to Sayyids because of their respect and love towards the household of the Holy Prophet of Islam. But the definition cited by this individual is that Sayyids are the children conceived through a mass orgy performed on the night of Ashura. So go to any country, any Shia city, they have these ceremonies, and a lot of people tend to sort of dim the lights or turn the lights off so people could, express an outpour of emotion on the night of Ashura. It's a very solemn occasion. And on that point, I remember an incident which was really funny. There is a mosque, one of the main mosques in London, And the caretaker of the mosque, it's a Shia mosque, this guy, he says that we've got these neighbors, and as we all know, Muslims are terrible when it comes to treating their neighbors. So when they want to go to the mosque, they park their cars in illegal places, and London is a terrible city to park your car in because it's all illegal for some reason. There is no legal place where you can park your car. So what these people do, these Muslims, being the typical Muslims that they are, they come and they park their cars around the neighborhood, and they cause a lot of nuisance to the whole area. So this guy says, in an effort to try and combat any sense of hostility towards Muslims, one of the things I do, and it's a beautiful gesture, it's a really nice PR move, is that I would go around the different homes, and every once in a while I'd check up on them, I'd pay them a little visit, I'd give them a gift, and just try to smooth things over, lest they go and complain to the authorities and we'd have a huge problem. He says, on one occasion, I knew of this elderly woman who lived in the neighborhood, and she was hospitalized. So after being released from hospital, I went to her home, and I took a bouquet of flowers, and I knocked at the door. She answered, and I said, I'm here to check up on you and see how you're doing and stuff like that. So after she took the flowers, she invited him in, and then she mustered up the courage to ask him a few questions about their faith and their beliefs. So she said, let me ask you something about, your rituals and what you do at the mosque. First of all, why is it that the mosque is almost empty throughout the year, except on 2 occasions? You've got this month, right, where a lot of people tend to come to the mosque, but every other month around the year, nobody seems to care about the mosque and what's happening in there. And then you've got this 10-day period as well. She'd really done her homework. You've got this 30-day period and you've got the 10-day period, the month of Ramadan and the month of Muharram. Otherwise, the mosque is almost empty throughout the year. So that's the first question, which is food for thought. The second question was, she goes, what I see is a lot of families parking their cars, then walking to the mosque together as families, and they encounter other families along the way, and they say salam, and the men kiss and hug the men, and the women do the same thing to the women, which is weird. But then they go to the mosque, and as they're about to enter, they suddenly split into men and women. What's happening there? I mean, you're walking together as families, then you suddenly split into gender groups. The third question, and perhaps the most important, is that why do I see you guys going to the mosque, then after a while switching the lights off, then beating the living daylights out of each other, then walking out laughing, talking about the matam and the azadar. You beat the living daylights out of each other, then you walk out and you're laughing. What's wrong with you people? Which brings me to my next point. The campaign of misinformation has been out there for a long time. It's not new. In fact, I remember I once walked into a massive international expo of broadcast equipment and services, trying to get some deals signed for the Ahlul Bayt TV channel. And as I walked in, I was with my younger brother, Sayyid Hussein, and he looked at me and said, do you realize what we're trying to do here? I said, what do you mean? Massive expo. It took us 4 days to go through just half of it. He said, do you realize what we're trying to do? I said, what? Yeah, we're here to buy some equipment, sign some deals. He said, no, we're all here, you and I, we're here to counter what everybody else is trying to do. You've got all these broadcasters, all these manufacturers, all these service providers, thousands upon thousands of them, trying to achieve a goal that the two of us are trying single-handedly to counter. And I thought about it for a moment, and he's right. You've got the media establishments of the world trying to do things, and us trying to counter what they're doing, trying to refute the misconceptions, trying to present a better image of Islam. Nobody cares about correcting the image of Islam if we don't do that ourselves. The campaign has been in existence for a long time. You all know how when the commander of the faithful, Amir al-Mu'mineen, the master of believers, Ali ibn Abi Talib, the greatest companion and the friend of the Holy Prophet of Islam, was martyred while praying. When news gets to Sham, people start asking, hang on a second, Ali used to pray? We didn't realize he used to pray. Who told you he prayed? So the campaign, the systematic campaign of character assassination against the Ahlul Bayt has been in existence for time immemorial. What we're trying to do is counter all of that. How do we do that? Well, I've got a few ideas to share with you. But before I mention those, I think we need to look at things like, let me give you an example, really, and going back to the cigarette and the tobacco industry. My father uses a beautiful example when it comes to the idea of marketing Islam and creating better PR for this religion. He says things like, when it comes to getting an expert on a panel in a TV show about Islam, what do you normally get? What's the caliber of the people that you get invited to those shows? I don't know if it's done intentionally or inadvertently. I really don't know. But you always tend to get somebody who's got, the Wahhabi, the typical Wahhabi kind of appearance, long bushy beard, dyed in orange for some weird reason, sitting in front of the camera, speaking with a very heavy, very thick Middle Eastern or subcontinental kind of accent. I mean, as a Muslim, you feel repulsed by a lot of these people. So imagine what a non-Muslim feels like. Whereas, if you wanted to get a Jewish rabbi, right, on TV, what do you get? You get someone who's clean-shaven, well-suited, sitting down, cracking jokes about what his wife told him that morning. And it makes you really love the guy. You really connect with him. And so what needs to be done is for us to sit down and seriously reconsider our PR. And I think one of the most effective means of PR, one of the most effective means of correcting this erroneous image depicted of Islam is to help nourish and support in every possible way our newly reverted brothers and sisters. These people, you can't go wrong with them, right? They're born and bred in their respective countries. They don't have the language barrier. They don't have the culture barrier. When they speak in a way that everyone can relate to them. They are endowed with so much knowledge, having gone through the challenges of relinquishing their old faith and embracing a new one. They're very, very knowledgeable, intelligent people. Unfortunately, sometimes they're stigmatized in certain Muslim communities as being outcasts or as being people who are just lacking in their understanding of the faith, because we somehow feel this inherent birthright to Islam. That as a Muslim, I am naturally more knowledgeable than you are, which in most cases, let's face it, is not true. The challenges they had to overcome in order to become Muslims allowed them to learn so much about the faith that puts most of us to shame. So, help them, support them, nourish them. I don't know what you have to do. Get them over there in front of the cameras. You should take a step back and support them from behind the scenes. That's actually something we did with the Ahlul Bayt TV channel. With the Ahlul Bayt network, from day one, we sat down and we thought, you know what? Let's not eliminate, Muslims that were born into the faith. People from the Middle East or other Muslim countries. Let's obviously give them a pulpit. Let's put them out there. But we should try our best to have non-Muslims who reverted to the religion of Islam in front of the camera. That's what we did there. And we had people like Dr. Rebecca Masterton, who's an English revert to Islam. A lot of you who have watched the Ahlul Bayt channel are very familiar with her. Brilliant individual, really knowledgeable. She's a doctor. She teaches at university. She's a professor at university. Absolutely brilliant human being. And in fact, you saw her on the clip that we showed last night. We sent her to Karbala in order to spearhead the team that would be broadcasting live images from the holy city of Karbala during the Muharram period in Ashura. And it was absolutely moving, absolutely wonderful to have her talk about Imam Hussein and talk about her sort of personal, intimate relationship with the Imam, and experiencing such an amazing outpour of emotion. I think that's much more powerful than someone with a turban talking about the same things. And of course we have other people as well. We have a show dedicated just to reverts and their experiences. And I'm a very strong advocate for reverts to be empowered, for every single revert to write a book about, talking about their experiences and the challenges and how they ended up converting to the religion of Islam. I think it's very, very inspirational. To sum up, I've got a few other points to share with you. And let's start with the most basic things. Not only join him, but to lay his life for him. To get a Christian to convert to Islam on the night of Ashura and to join his mission and to lay his life for him. To get that Christian man's wife to do the same thing. To get his mother to do the same thing. I mean, that's no easy feat, brothers and sisters. To interact, to be yourself. In fact, to quote Dr. Rebecca Masterton, she says, sometimes all I need to do, really, I'm wearing the hijab and I'm sitting on the bus, and obviously I get these people gawking at me and looking at me in weird ways, thinking I'm packing some AK-47 beneath the veil, or I'm going to blow myself up or something. The best thing I could do, and the easiest thing and the simplest thing I do, is that I simply start a conversation. I start talking to them about the weather. And she says, I have found that to be one of the most effective ways to break the ice and to get them to talk to me. It humanizes us. I mean, I'd hate to say this, but we're not seen as human beings, as these outcasts, these weirdos from overseas, fresh off the boat. Let's start talking to them about the weather and see how that changes their perception. Number two, as I mentioned, reverts and their empowerment, a very crucial element, which includes allowing them to get married to people from within our communities. And I've seen that happen increasingly in the UK. I'm not sure about the United States and how prevalent this practice is. But again, there is a stigma, unfortunately, which needs to be addressed, where they're seen as being not perfect, unlike us, because they come from that background. Number two, education. I cannot overemphasize that. And when I'm talking about education, I'm not talking about setting up universities where they have $1 million, like Stanford and Yale and Harvard. These Ivy League universities have $1 million invested for every single one of their students. Which means that if they have 1,000 students, they've got $1 billion in investments pouring back into the university to educate them, to give them a world-class education. I'm not talking about that, though of course that would be a great thing to aspire to. I'm talking about printing Nahjul Balagha. Dr. Legenhausen, he mentions a story about he converted to Islam by simply opening the first page of Nahjul Balagha and thinking this is not normal. And to conclude, to populate websites like Wikipedia. I think there really needs to be some sort of established, systemized process for us to have knowledgeable individuals, researchers and academics to contribute towards the articles that are published on Wikipedia. It is now considered the world's #1 source of information. It is even more accurate than Encyclopedia Britannica, and certainly with much greater width and breadth. And finally, the media. Brothers and sisters, there's only one English language television network broadcasting the pristine message of the Ahlul Bayt. It is called the Ahlul Bayt. Our motto is the holy household for every household. And we've tried as much as we can to live up to the motto, to try and really make the message of the Ahlul Bayt as easily accessible as we possibly can, to bring it into every single household, which is why in America it's available free to air. It's not available through the subscription services like Dish Network and DirecTV, because we wanted to make it accessible to every single human being. But it's really difficult to do that when you're suffering financially. Thank God we don't have any government support. Thank God we don't have any corporate backers, because all of those come with a lot of strings attached. But what I'm calling for is not just the support of this entity, but to start our own production companies, to start our own TV channels, our own local TV networks, is something that can be done. We did it.